I used to adore Alan Wake. I still do, but I can't say I adore the entire thing. Its pacing in the first 3 episodes is kind of atrocious. The game has such a problematic development that can be felt in the final product. Yet it has built such a strong cult following that would eventually lead to one of the greatest sequels in this generation, and that very game inspired me to make this retrospective series, dedicated to the developers Remedy Entertainment. From Max Payne all the way to Alan Wake 2, and now the sequel to Control releasing this year. Jesus. The point of these retrospectives is not to analyze it for the lore, but also get to the root of the gameplay and how well the narrative may facilitate those things. And to fully understand, we have to go back to the beginning, and it all started with a dream. Alan is in a hurry for some reason and crashes into a hitchhiker. He checks the body and see if he's alright, but once he confirmed he was dead, the lights go out and then he's gone. He couldn't make sense of it and treks onto the lighthouse. But that same hitchhiker is somehow back now, and can be discerned to be this shadowy figure. He presents a physical threat as he is a man yelling at you, swinging an axe violently, but also through his lines presents the internal struggle Alan is facing. He isn't a good writer. If this is in fact just a nightmare of his, it highlights his insecurities as a writer, and will inform his character arc throughout the game. However, it isn't just that, it's a tutorial. It highlights one of the key distinctions of Alan Wake and Max Payne. Max Payne promoted being creative with how you dive headfirst into gunfire. With Wake, you started off feeling incredibly powerless, just a guy. And that is emphasized with the dodging mechanic. Dodging is pretty simple. Just press the directional input along with the dodge button and you've done it. But the other part of it is running away, and Alan runs out of breath quickly, and it can be very frustrating, more than actually feeling stressful, as I'm sure that was the intent that the developer had when making this feature. It especially takes me out when there's this dark tornado thing that we are supposed to be running away from, and it's just supposed to be this very intense scene, but in between that, Alan has to catch his breath for a moment. It just takes you out of it very jarringly. Once we barely run across a bridge, we seemingly meet a friend named Clay Stewart. While he has a lot of merit in external media beyond the game that was released with it, his appearance here is to establish the threat of the dark presence. We see him use a gun on the shadowy figure with no effect, and just like that, dies. We are seemingly helpless against this dark entity. The cabin that was meant for safety quickly becomes a death trap, and we were saved by this almost heavenly light presence, voiced by James McCaffrey. Through his guidance, we learn that we can't kill these enemies with conventional means. We have to use the light to dispel the darkness. So God hands us a flashlight, which functions as the reticle and aim down sight feature for the game, along with, of course, having a gun to shoot. Mechanically, it's very simple. Aim down long enough and eventually the darkness protecting the entity shatters and leaves them vulnerable to gunfire. This gameplay mechanic, if you will, somewhat evolves later down the line, but we'll get there. The dream ends with us successfully jogging to the lighthouse and Alan waking up in a car next to his wife, Alice.
He's here. Alan, wake up. Shh, baby, just another nightmare. Everything's fine. You dozed off.
Right. Anything more than dozed off would be news for everyone.
Cheer up, handsome. We're here.
We are on the boat to Bright Falls. It's on the ride here that we learned that the trip to Bright Falls is to help Alan get a recharge, if you will, as he has struggled with writing for some time, especially after ending his crime novel series called Alex Casey. You can tell that this Alex Casey novel is a reflection of Remedy's previous work on Max Payne. I mention it not because of reference, but I also believe that mindset that Alan has with his writing translates rather wonderfully through this game when you sit and think about it. Looking back on the strengths of this game and Remedy as a whole, it's very clear that the standout is the characters, and that is exemplified when Alan enters the Oh Dear Diner to pick up the keys for the cabin he's staying in from Charles Stuckey. He's immediately swooned over by the diner's waitress, Rose, seemingly his #1 fan, and of course how can I forget the Anderson brothers, and the little interaction of the jukebox to play the banger that is known as Coconut. But most importantly, the Lady of Light herself, Cynthia Weaver. All these characters are played wonderfully as you walk throughout the diner and really help give you a sense of what the town is about. Cynthia warns Alan about the dark. You can't fully tell she's crazy until a woman who looks ready for a funeral hands you the keys to the cabin, and is oddly insistent on seeing my wife. The funeral lady gives us the keys to a cabin on a lake, known as Cauldron Lake. It's homey, feels like we were warped to the 70s. Before we can get settled, we have to turn on a generator for light, which makes sense, but more importantly, we find out that Alice has a phobia to darkness, which I love how that is partly what brings them apart in this game. Later on in the night, Alice offers Alan a chance to write and to go see a doctor, Dr. Emil Hartman, a man that can possibly help him. However, Alan's temper, which has been alluded to a couple times in his first hour, now blows up on full display here.
That's not... Alan? Alan?
Just don't! I don't want to hear it! God damn it, Alice!
He walks outside to get some fresh air, and I love that we hear him in his monologue acknowledging that he does this because Alice wouldn't be able to follow him due to her phobia. Levels of fucked up, and he probably won't be able to apologize, as when we hear screams in the house from Alice, we rush back inside to find her taken outside into Cauldron Lake. In pure instinct, Alan jumps in after her and
Keep going. Wake up.
Alice?
we are just in a crashed car. No sense how we got here. All that Alan knows is that Alice was in danger, and we had to call for help. The game still holds up well for its vibes. The atmosphere from the music and the forest together is very nicely put together. A very cool way the game plays with Alan being an author is the manuscript. It's called Departure. These collectibles are a part of pages in a story that Alan himself doesn't remember writing at all, but are very helpful in finding out what the player may find next in the story. They also give great world building on characters you have met or haven't met yet, which is pretty cool. However, an issue I have with the manuscripts is that Alan himself doesn't really acknowledge it all too much. The stakes and the things that are written within these manuscripts, it feels more important to the player than to Alan himself. In terms of fully fledged gameplay stuff, we have the basic point and shoot mechanics we've established, but the game throws some curveballs at you, like the fucking tractor that tries to knock over the building you're inside of. And of course, let's go over the basic enemy types we have, the Taken as they're called. They're pretty simple archetypes, but the more engaging part of the combat comes through the use of the flashlight to break their shield, so you can shoot them. Some enemies may come from varying angles or vantage points, so you may have to prioritize one over another. Some thinking has to be done to really make effectiveness of your flashlight and the battery that you have, which are limited. Combined with the dodge mechanic, this is actually a pretty solid foundation for a combat system. However, this all falls apart when you realize that batteries recharge over time passively. Basically, you can never run out of batteries, and that completely takes away the whole need of resource management of batteries if you can just charge them up passively and just use the aim down sights feature whenever you need to. Flashlights aren't the only weapons against darkness. You can find flares and flare guns in these marked spots left by someone who seemingly understands the dangers of the night. And since of course we are in America, bigger guns. There are points in the game where all these weapons make combat more engaging. Using a flare gun at the right time to take care of multiple enemies in one cinematic shot is great. At times throughout the story, the game limits the weapons you have, so you have to deal with enemies in creative ways with tools you have or run away to safety in the light. That is the extent of the gameplay of Alan Wake 1. The main thing that enhanced and left a meaningful and lasting impression was the lore, the story behind it. There are a couple of ways the game expands on these things, mainly through manuscripts, but also through TV or radio. Within the radio, you can hear Matt Payne's radio station whenever you find one. He will cover events as they happen throughout the game and help give perspective on the wild shit that happens as you go deeper into the story. On the other hand, we have the TV, which actually provides even more wild shit, most notably the Night Spring episodes, which presents different concepts that may or may not have anything to do with the game. In fact, a good amount of them feel more relevant to Alan Wake 2, which releases 13 years from this one, which is kinda nice. They are well placed and don't take away from the experience. In fact, it helps the player think more deeply about the various plot threads. You'll also at times see Alan himself in the writer's room, but in live action, played by the actor that physically represents him, Ikavili. At first it's just him crashing out and not making sense, but it then later becomes him explaining things so the player can understand what's happening. I think that helps me talk about my biggest issue with this game and the way it presents its narrative ideas. There are multiple ways the game struggles with this, and it's because it's balancing a lot. When episode 1 ends, Alan is taken to Dyra's Isle by the Bright Falls Sheriff, and you find that the house you stayed at hasn't been there since the 70s. It's a very interesting way to start the game. Your wife is gone, you have no memory of the past week, and you are apparently in a horror story you have no memory of writing. However, that writing doesn't push itself as far as I like to in the early episodes. Episode 2 and 3 are about Alan being jerked around Bright Falls to try and find Alice. This is legit what episode 2 is. Alan is bailed out of custody thanks to Barry Wheeler, his agent, He's a fan favorite due to how effectively his personality and demeanor contrasts with Alan's. And the dialogue and banter between the two makes it feel like they're believable best friends.
Seriously, Al, what you were saying in the car? Just listen to yourself. What, you shot a guy and his body just disappeared? When was the last time you slept? What, are you high? Have you been drinking?
No! Look, Barry, I'm missing a week, and someone's got Alice.
Do
and
you
everything's
understand what it sounds like when you say stuff like that? Don't get me wrong, it's a good story, could be a bestseller. But when you start confusing fiction with reality, you're buying yourself a
He carries these couple of episodes because as Alan, we go to some place, then are told to go to another and are forced somewhere else. There are some cool gameplay moments and things that help switch up the gameplay a bit, and the game throws bones here and there to keep the story relevant. Maybe through manuscript pages or introducing new characters like Mott, who is the person who called Alan about having his wife. You're forced to work with him and protect him as you go through horrors of Taken. And the core gameplay loop of Alan Wake is pretty good. It just feels very stagnant to get through. A lot of the major lore drops are just told to you. Barry will straight up tell you things about Thomas Zane and Barbara Jagger, things he found in between episodes of the game. Investigations and revelations you don't get to experience just get told to you like a casual conversation. At the beginning of episode 3, you meet Rose, the waitress at the diner, as she called saying she has more manuscript pages. Mott is holding Alice hostage in exchange for the complete story of departure, yet Alan doesn't have them all. There's a lot the game is balancing, but it doesn't manage them all that well. We get drugged by Rose, who was apparently possessed by the dark presence to try to get Alan to finish writing. We apparently missed a day while we were passed out by Rose, so we were just going to go and meet a kidnapper at a mine and hoping things would work out. Then they throw in FBI agent Nightingale, who just has beef with Wake for seemingly no reason, which adds a whole new layer that won't get addressed. And by the time we find a car and get in the mines, it's clear to me how the open world influence affected the game's development. Yes, for 3 years of this game's development, it was considered to be an open world survival game, but was changed due to the fact that it couldn't handle it with all of its narrative ideas and structure. A lot of the sections or levels are just what was built for the open world. It's very apparent in the driving sections how sprawling they are, filled with different secrets and houses to explore. The open world reflects a lack of focus the game has, and because of that, it struggles to go anywhere. The game feels really at odds with itself in terms of writing and gameplay. This game has been really hard to break down as there really isn't really much to break down. This would be fine if this game was like Control or something like that, as that game is carried by the atmosphere and the vibes. However, in Wake, there isn't moments of calm, really to stop and take the space in. You're told constantly you have to go, 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 save Alice, but every episode just feels rather meaningless to get to that objective. While playing these episodes for the first time, it may not feel that's the case as we are still learning and waiting to see where the game takes us, and the game throws some decent variety in gameplay as I mentioned before, like in episode 3 when we are being chased by FBI agent Robert Nightingale, and the cops are searching for us. Along with the dark presence, we have limited tools to evade a Taken and have to use puzzles in the environment to progress. Combined with the game's solid variety of weapons and sources of light to play with, it isn't the worst thing to go through from a gameplay experience. But then we go back to the story. When we find Amat at the top of Mirror Peak, it's revealed that he never had Alice. So yeah, pretty much making this entire ordeal worthless. Episode 3 ends with Alan being forced to jump down to Cauldron Lake in this rather slow-mo-esque fashion. And look, I have a hot take. I think the slow-mo is stupid in the cutscenes. In gameplay, it's fine, but I feel like it's derivative. The slow-mo rarely enhances a feeling. To me, it comes across as a typical 2010s video game way of making things cool. In the case of Max Payne, slow-mo was an integral part of those games. In Alan Wake, they feel like a tacked-on choice. When you consider the fact that Alan Wake was intended to be an open-world game, it just seems like a lot of creative choices were thrown into the pot and they barely support one another. When I talk to people about Alan Wake, they don't really know what it is. In the case of Alan Wake 2, yeah, that's totally fine. I still don't entirely know what that game is about. But that feels like the point. In these first 3 episodes of Alan Wake 1, the game doesn't know what it wants to be. I say that and partly due to the fact that we just spent like 3 episodes just to reveal that this guy that had our wife was not even relevant, and also because these creative choices that were made during development feel poorly utilized. And because of that, you kind of lose purpose, and if you can't obtain that, how do you expect people to take your work seriously? Not to say that there isn't passion involved in this project, but in compared to the focus and character work in Max Payne 2, this is a bit of a letdown. Episode 4 begins in Dr. Emil Hartman's retreat for creatives struggling to create. It doesn't feel right, and especially with the manuscripts, you should already know by now that he has something to do with the goose chase we went on the past few episodes. It's with episode 4 that things actually start to click in all facets. When we meet the Anderson brothers, they tell us to go to their farm. It should set us straight, but getting out of here is essential to that. There's a storm that is coming for the retreat. Chaos is ensuing, and Alan finds a way out during all this. We get confirmation that Emil and Mott are working together to try and use Alan to make a manuscript so Hartman can control the forces of darkness that resides in Cauldron Lake. It's here where I thought to myself, I wish the game just started here. Episode 2 and 3 felt like meaningless padding. Now we are like halfway through the game and it's starting to go somewhere. I think episode 2 should have had Alan being in the retreat instead of going to the police station. Could have had Mott pick him up from the gas station. Barry would of course find Alan and help him out. But it's also where the Anderson brothers would set us on the right path. Throughout the game, it feels like we were on the wrong one. Because now that we have a more attainable goal, the game feels a lot better. The iconic Anderson farm mission is the highlight, of course, feeling like a proper power trip as we go through waves of enemies with the help of Barry. However, it is a bit too late. Alan and Barry get drunk, and Alan opens his mind to have the entire game's plot spelled out to you. In a dream/flashback sequence, which on one hand, this is a 2010 game, such evolving plots is hard to present in a game like this. However, you could have made it better if we didn't waste so much time the past 2 episodes. It is revealed in his dream that when Alan dived after Alice, he became under the influence of the Dark Presence to write a story for it to get out of Cauldron Lake and eventually the rest of the world, under the guise of getting Alice back. It wasn't until Thomas Zane, the diver, the person that used to reside in the Cauldron Lake cabin, interrupting the ending of the horror story, allowing Alan to escape, leading to where we begin in the game. Unfortunately though, I do have to nitpick, and I'll say I wish Alan knew that he was under the influence of the Dark Presence writing the story at the beginning of the game. This would have allowed Alan to have more impersonal investment to the things that happen. Obviously, yes, it's like, of course, his wife, he's trying to figure it out and where his wife is, I get that. But having it be known and more in his head that, oh, all this stuff is happening to me, all the people that are dying, all the shit that's happening, all the lives that are being affected, all on Alan, that could have put in another level of pressure, and I don't know, wish would have given us more to think about and engage with the story in a more deeper way, because you honestly don't really get a chance to do that. Because even when Alan does acknowledge it, he barely is woken up because the episode ends with the reveal that Robert Nightingale is right in front of him. And Robert Nightingale is such an interesting antagonistic character. I hope we get to learn something about him. Well, that hope is just very short-lived because he dies before we get anything out of him. The game is just wrapping up plots in rather rapid succession. Some are unfortunately short-lived, like the Nightingale stuff. Others enhance the story, more like Cynthia Weaver, who we learn from a song we hear from the Andersons back at their cabin that she's actually very important. She apparently holds the key to actually defeating the Dark Presence. She holds up in the dam, using the power from it to keep up these massive light defenses. She has supposedly been fighting against the darkness on her own for decades, and she was thought to be crazy. Her efforts were all in the name of love for Thomas Zane, a poet who once stayed in Bright Falls, but mysteriously vanished. We learned this was caused by the Dark Presence tricking him to write a way to release it using the face of Barbara Jagger, his dead girlfriend. Zane stopped it from getting out back in the 70s, but left something for Cynthia to safeguard in case it comes back. All of this is built up rather nicely through dialogue, and you understand the obsessive nature Cynthia Weaver has. I will say that these last couple episodes have been great in terms of gameplay design and mission structure. We work with the Bright Falls Sheriff to get through Bright Falls via puzzles and fighting waves of enemies together, along with Barry Wheeler. Even episode 4, getting to the Anderson cabin and going through it has been a very dynamic experience, and it really just feels like the game has just locked in from a gameplay sense as well, just as Alan himself has started to understand his purpose in all of this. Episode 5 ends revealing what Thomas Zane left for Alan. It was in a shoebox, the clicker. The gift that Alan's mother gave to him as a child was to ward off his dark nightmares. We learn in flashbacks that he gives the clicker to his wife to help combat her phobia. But it's here somehow due to Thomas Zane, in a story that Alan himself has written. Even more so, there is a page here from Thomas Zane, and is describing Alan going to Cauldron Lake and using the clicker one last time to stop the dark presence. Episode 5 opens with a flashback back in Alan's apartment in New York. The game has you recover from a hangover after a party we learned he was out for till about 7 a.m. We take pills and start wearing sunglasses to make the day bearable for him. We turn on the TV and see him on the Harry Garrett talk show. This gives a fantastic background on Alan's career. How he's been writing for 6 years on his Alice Casey crime novels. How now that it's over, he ended up killing off Casey so Alan himself can move on from that character, so he can make a departure from that sort of thing. The show goes into his public outings, how he apparently hit a reporter at a party, and oh shit, it's Sam Lake. Alice comes home and Alan loses his cool. The tour for his final Casey novel was getting to him, and that pushed the decision to leave New York and eventually make the trip to Bright Falls. Now back in present day, Alan knows what he needs to do to put an end to the story. Using the clicker to get back into the dark place, make a proper ending to the story, and defeat the dark presence while he's at it. He forces Barry and Sheriff Baker to stay behind so he can go to Cauldron Lake on his own, and I'd be all for this. However, the journey to get to Cauldron Lake feels rather meaningless. Holy ad, Batman. There isn't really much emotion really charged in its drive. This feels like leftovers planned for the open world of the game to shine. There are some cool tidbits like finding Agent Nightingale's room where he stayed in, showcasing his obsession with Wake. But however, all this just reminds me more of what is missing in Alan Wake. More specifically, Agent Nightingale. In development, he was supposedly going to be a different playable character that would have allowed for the perspective of the plot to be enhanced in some way. This idea would eventually evolve into what Saga Anderson is in Alan Wake 2. The ending of Wake 1 is still good, just getting there is such a drag, which is how I feel about most of the game. How much this bothers you really depends on how much you really enjoy the gameplay or care for the story. For me personally, I think my story-based game about a writer should have more things going on for the story, but as I mentioned, it takes a while for it to actually get anywhere. Which is a shame, as once it does do something, it takes it places that people like myself never understood for years to come, like the ending itself. As Alan says in the beginning, the most impactful questions are the ones left unanswered. Whatever "it's not a lake but an ocean" meant has been a daunting question that has been held in the thoughts of many Remedy players for over a decade. There are plenty of questions the more down the rabbit hole you explore. Did Thomas Zane write the story Alan is in, or did Alan write Thomas Zane into the story? What is Mr. I believe these very questions are kind of what made this game a cult classic, at least partly so. Because yeah, once you explore all the different side characters, lore pieces you can find in-game and the game's external media, like live action shorts or books, it can be kind of engaging. But the fact of the matter is, I feel like that's all Alan Wake really had going for it. Unanswered questions and an unfinished, complete vision. Especially after playing Alan Wake 2, that game feels like a complete vision. Wake 1 doesn't. And I believe as a fan, seeing wherever this vision may take us is what kept this community engaged for a long time. And those very questions that came to be from the base game will be expanded on in the DLC. After Alan sacrifices himself to end the story of departure, he's trapped in a dark place. He's in this dream-like state, trying to find Thomas Zane, but this place, the dark place, is trying to stop him, putting Alan through a ridiculous horror story, forcing him to fight waves of enemies and foes, and the environment being so jagged and fragmented. The dark place wasn't trying to be subtle with its desire to stop Alan. There's this seemingly twisted version of him that is making this horror story happen. And this has been said before, but Matthew Peretta's voice acting chops kinda goes hard here.
The playground! Wake's pathetic memories of the Wonder Years and the contrary little boy pretending he didn't miss his father he never knew. It surged up and beat Wake down, merry-go-rounds and slides, eager to cane in his head.
I will say I think the deadpan we hear from him in the base game is an intentional choice, given Alan's more depressed state and I just don't give a fuck mindset. Here in A Dark Place, his voice performance as his other Alan, it's giving crazy, but not in a cheesy way. It makes sense The Dark Place would be this apparent in its desire to kill Alan, as subtlety wasn't really in its nature in the base game, between the Taken and the literal poltergeist we fought. Now that we are in its own world, it can let loose. With that, we as Alan Wake ourselves have some unique tricks as well. The game takes the use of his ability to write here nicely. You can shine your flashlight on words, and these words will give you resources, weapons, and other things that will help you in progression and puzzle solving. This is really smart and allows for the devs to push the creativity of this concept to a different level, one that will then be expanded on more in the sequel. Genuinely very creative stuff, and it should be noted that this first episode is such a great difficulty spike in compared to the base game's difficulty. Enemies come from the most unpredictable places. There is word hazards that can be used against you if you're not constantly aware of where you are shining your flashlight, but those hazards can be used against enemies, so it brings something fresh to combat loot. Also, a lot more fights take place indoors, enforcing this level of claustrophobia to a lot of fights that weren't present in the base game. Speaking of dynamics, you meet Barry Wheeler here again. Well, a figment of him based on Alan's perception of him. This allows for us, the players, to get a better understanding of Alan's psyche, how he sees himself.
See, this is the way things should be. I give advice, and you follow. That's when things go right. When you get up to something on your own, that's when the trouble starts.
That's horseshit.
Al, I'm not saying anything you haven't come up with first. Big mint, remember?
This kind of thing could drive a man insane.
This idea of how Alan perceives himself is brought more into fruition at the beginning of the end of this DLC. We see a flashback to a photo shoot with him and Alice Wake. Alice asks Alan to pose in a way that reflects his writing. This idea will be relevant when talking about American Nightmare. Given the fact that Alan killed off Alice Casey in his novel, he needs to have something that reflects a killer, and so that is how he is perceived to the public, or at least attempted to do so. Episode 1 Episode 1 ends with Alan defeating the evil version of himself on TV, but we learn from Thomas Zane that the TV isn't just some illusion created by the dark place, it's him. A part of Alan that has given up and wants to die. We are playing the part of him that is trying to persevere. All of this that we are experiencing is from that part of Alan, that one that wants to just die. And we explore more of that in episode 2. What this DLC does very well compared to the base game is having memorable gameplay variety. While in the base game is more about going here and dragging you along on a wild goose chase, this episode in particular takes things slow. Now that Alan understands what's happening, he can better manage the environment around him, and that's reflective in the gameplay. There's puzzles that aren't just out to kill you, but help you. Barry is still here, and it feels more fun than actually stressful for Alan to have him here.
I had to accept it. If all of this was from my mind, then I was the one making all this happen. I was literally fighting myself. It was a moment of clarity.
Because of that realization, it feels like Alan is taking more of an active role throughout this episode, which is something he lacked in the base game. For this episode as Alan, we must find ourselves, literally. He's in Thomas Zane's cabin. The level design we go through takes this rather larger-than-life sort of thing. We're making bridges out of words through tornadoes, and we are going through mazes of pipe tunnels, going through a moving clock. The puzzles are very nice. It feels like the words aren't against you, but can actually be helpful, like you are taking control back of your own story. Zane is now able to help as well. He guides and makes paths for us, but he isn't very clear on what his purpose is. It's just applied, but mentioning all of that can be, take up a whole other video. It's with Zane's help we are able to go through what feels like different tiers of thoughts, reality being blended together, giving us this deeper look into Alan's psyche, having Dr. Emil Hartman break down Alan's own lack of self-worth. How he uses his writing as a crutch to avoid addressing his problems. The audio tape from Alice just hitting the hammer on the head.
I don't want to know. I don't think I'll ever be all right. The only thing that keeps me from killing myself is the hope that I'll never see you again.
Ouch.
I just can't argue with that. I think I should stay here before I ruin what life she has left.
I think this is a breakthrough, Alan. I'm really very proud of you.
This is obviously a very, very loud voice in Alan's head, giving himself a reason to stop trying, to stop writing, to find a way out. I really do appreciate the game for taking the time to give us that insight into his psyche. That was really powerful for me. To get to Thomas Zane's cabin, we have to go to a big lighthouse, the most logical place of safety in a place as dark as this. And the game presents a chance to use it as a way to maneuver around waves and enemies with ease. But of course, before we get inside, Alan has to let go a bit of what he knows, that being the figment of his imagination, Barry Wheeler. We have to fight the base game's main villains, which to me, this entire fight feels like Alan's way is sending him off to let go of them and move on to other things, including his own best friend. That's how he used Alice Casey in his books, so it aligns with what we already know who Alan is. Anyway, the boss fight itself is pretty ass, and Alan finds himself, and it sets up for sequel stuff. And for some time, I was disappointed that the sequel ended up being American Nightmare, which isn't really a sequel, but an Xbox arcade game for Alan Wake, and I just don't understand what made Microsoft think Alan Wake would go crazy as an arcade game, but we're here and we just ball. But I will say this game has grown on me quite a bit on this replay, as it's actually a very interesting concept. Alan's clone for the Dark Place, Mr. Scrooge, is trying to let out the Dark Presence out in full. So we go through Nevada to try to chase after him and stop him from getting out fully, I suppose. We meet a woman named Emma Sloan. She hands us a manuscript that tells us everything we need. We have to find 3 items so we can rewrite reality based on things in the manuscript. So a bit of the go here, get this gameplay loop. However, this game is divided in multiple sections. The motel, which is where we start and meet Emma Sloan, the observatory, and the theater. I mean, the reason why there is only 3 main levels is because the gimmick here is it's a time loop that Alan's in. And initially, that turned me off, as I wasn't really vibing with this arcade vibe, and the idea of this looping just demotivated me, and the idea of having to go through and going through this checklist again. But as I play this game and go through it fully, it's kind of the genius of it. See, what I didn't realize is that every loop is different. Characters you meet, you see die, will have some recollection of the last loop. In fact, because of this recollection, they'll actually prepare for your arrival. Alan himself will already know where to go, lessening a time-consuming nature. There's meaningful progression here, and I love it. Mr. Scrooge is actively trying to deter us to give up, as he has us trapped in this loop. And it is supposed to come off rather tedious. But with the help Alan has from the side characters, it makes for a meaningful experience, which I think more or less informs the creative decisions of Alan Wake 2. Each loop ends with Alan trying to rewrite reality to find out what Alice had made in the real world, to use whatever that is to eventually destroy the image of Mr. Scrooge. See, as I mentioned in the DLC portion of this video, Mr. Scrooge is a clone of Alan. He's built from the Dark Place, but at the same time, he's a manifestation of what people perceive Alan to be in the real world. Mr. Scratch has been going out and committing murders, building up this folktale of sorts, of Alan Wake as a serial killer. You see some of that through the TV messages he leaves, where Ikavilli is having fun in his body performance with Matthew Peretta just killing it. Now, there are still things I still don't like. Like, why are the typewritten words unaligned with the paper? Like Alan, doesn't use a typewriter. Shout out to Emmy. I still hate the arcade nature of this. The fucking ogres we fight. The fact that guns are locked behind collecting manuscript pages, it's just too much. I'm fine with weird, but this isn't even creative weird. I also think the way they handle the whole rewriting of reality is very boring. Just these very random things that have no meaning. Wake 2 actually handled this concept better, as it actually was due to world building that made the reality process more meaningful and engaging. Here, it's just turn a wheel this way or have a clock set that way. It's just I don't need to explain any more than that, yeah? But still, making the satellite crash is still pretty iconic. And I guess that's really it. I do like the ending of this game. I think it highlights what's important to Alan Wake, and it's his love for Alice. Alice made a short film using pictures that she had taken of Alan years ago, during a vacation they had. In fact, the very shirt that Alan's wearing is from that very vacation, to help take control of the narrative of him, highlighting the man she loved instead of the thing that Mr. Scratch is. I think there's just a lot of things in American Nightmare that feels very relevant to Wake 2, and seeing how they are even handled in this game is quite interesting, in seeing how it all evolves. As I end this video, I just want to refer to a quote that I saw that I think really perfectly encapsulates my issue with Alan Wake and the next game after, is that it feels like Alan Wake and Quantum Break, as we will talk about, is just Remedy in a filter. Now, I know Alan Wake had management issues, but it's even more apparent when Sam Wake mentioned with Quantum Break that Xbox had a very major influence in the direction of where the studio would go. And honestly, as I look back on it more, it just seemed like the studio was rather directionless for some time. Alan Wake has been fun, even at its worst. I can still find things to appreciate about it, and knowing where it would lead makes me even more happy that it exists. Till next time.
I keep failing, but I must keep trying. I use the story to dive deeper. Every word I write is a step forward on this spiral of the darkness. I dive to the bottom to find the answer, the map and the key, the compass, that's combined to form a door leading out. But how do you open a door that's not a door? Or at the bottom of an ocean that's not an ocean, and a lake that's not a lake?